Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar on summer sports camps and COVID-19 risk mitigation considerations. We're going to give everybody about another minute to log on, and then we'll get started. All right, here we go. So again, I'd like to welcome everybody to our summer sports camp COVID-19 risk mitigation considerations webinar. Today we're going to focus on, as a follow-up to the webinar we gave last week on insurance liability and sort of what we need to be thinking about as we open up any type of event, whether it be tournament, camp, small-sided scrimmage, clinic, contest. So today we're going to focus primarily on sports camps, and once again I'm excited to have Ellis Mayer with us. Just in case, as a reminder, Ellis is the Chief Medical Officer at Go for Ellis and the current chair of the National Athletic Trainers Association Youth Sports Work Group. She's the former director of participant health and safety at Next Sports and has worked as an athletic trainer at Boston University, Penn State University, and Monsignor Bonner High School. In my former life, I was the founder and CEO of Next Sports. I have over 25 years of camp experience. Actually, this is where I first met Ellis on our days at Next, was at a lacrosse camp with the Episcopal Academy. And over the years, we have come up with several strategies on how to run a better camp. So today we're going to focus on we're going to identify the key issues that need to be considered before hosting the sports camp. And more importantly, examine how athletic trainers can help execute mitigation strategies. Before I move on here, just a quick reminder, we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. And you can find the Q&A button on your menu. So first thing we need to consider is what we're about to present to you is sort of how we potentially would look at running a camp, but we got to follow the lead of authority sources. And those authority sources are certainly the CDC. The CDC published a massive guidelines for return to play with youth sports on May 19th, which is linked in the webinar. Two, and most importantly, it's your state and local health departments that are really going to give you the most relevant guidelines for your camp, your practice, your clinic, and how you are going to return to the field. And for example, how you would run a camp in Pennsylvania, in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, is going to be way different than how you will run a camp in Odessa, Texas. And frankly, the public health departments could have different requirements and different guidelines on how you would do that. So it's really important that you monitor websites, emails, and social media from not only the CDC and your local health departments, but also from your governing bodies and sanctioning bodies that oversee your sport. So Ellis is going to talk specifically about the issues that you need to be thinking about as you return to a field in a camp, clinic, practice, all the above. So the first thing we got to talk about is, what sport are you playing? So Ellis, can you talk about how that creates a different set of issues depending on what sport you're playing?
Great, thanks, Andy. So obviously there's different levels. Every sport is different. We have different rules. There's going to be different risks that are associated with each sport, just like there's any sort of different amount of risk that there are for regular musculoskeletal injuries. So some sports naturally have more distancing in between them. In the camp setting especially, you can really work on more position work and things like that, as opposed to really getting to those competition scenarios. So some sports like baseball, you can really spread your campers out and really work on those position drills. Other sports like wrestling and some other sports really have a lot more contact just because of the nature of the sport. If you also have to do kind of an audit on the amount of contact there is with equipment. So sports like basketball or volleyball involve a lot of passing of the ball back and forth between people. So maybe acquiring more equipment is a good thing, and having kids bring their own equipment so that they don't have to be constantly changing equipment and handing different pieces of equipment to each other. Modifying drills to reduce contact is going to be very helpful here. So making sure that and we're going to get more into drills later on. I know, Andy, you're going to touch on it a lot. This is something that you're really going to want to think about going into camp, is that a lot of our normal camp drills that we do probably won't work in this scenario. So really taking a kind of personal inventory of what are the drills I like to run at camp, and then how can I reduce contact between players? How can I reduce contact between equipment? And how can I reduce contact between the coaches and the campers themselves? Really want to focus on kind of non-contact skill building drills. And I know, Andy, we're going to touch on that in a little bit.
Yep, absolutely. And then the big question is when you have camp, typically you have camp or campers that are maybe 8 years old up to 14, depending on what kind of camp you're running. And there's some real issues that you need to consider when you have younger kids and older kids. Ellis, how do we attack the difference in age groups at camps?
Yep, so age is going to play a huge role here. So in theory, our older campers should be able to listen and follow directions a lot more easily than our younger campers. So if you are having a younger camp, you want to think about things and tools you can use to help younger kids. And these are things you can steal from education, or if you do have coaches that are in elementary education, might want to talk to them about how do I help teach these things and keep it safe social distancing, because these are going to be people that are normally used to working with younger kids. So a lot of visual cueing will be able to help. So we'll get into this a little bit later too, but if there's a cone and a home cone, and that's your cone for the day, and you put your water bottle there, you put your stick there, and you don't leave that cone. Lining up whether it's like colors or things like that, where you can really try and help them with the visual cueing of this is where you should stand during this drill to help maintain that social distancing. You also want to make sure that you're not sharing water bottles, people aren't touching their faces, practicing good hygiene, making sure you're talking to your campers all about washing their hands and using hand sanitizer. And this should be, in theory, a little bit older for our older age athletes to follow, because sometimes it's just a little bit hard to understand all of the rules right away with younger kids. One also strategy that I've heard some people utilizing with younger age kids is having the parents there and be involved. Obviously, that's going to bring more people to camp. So having them off on the sidelines, really spread apart. So maybe if there is a break, it's like, all right, go run to your parent, go sit with your parent, and the parents can help enforce those social distancing guidelines during these camps for younger kids.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as we slide into what I think is primarily the most important aspect of this webinar, is that an organization who's planning on running a camp needs to really sit down and think through every day at camp, every logistic, every touch point, every engagement between a camper, a parent, a staff member, a director, and obviously someone there who's in charge of your medical procedure and protocol. And so one of the things that I cannot stress enough, and I know Ellis is going to agree, is you really need to think hard and long about how you're going to pull camp off. And we kind of have a preliminary list of things that you need to be thinking about. And Ellis and I are going to go back and forth here, me as a camp director, and then Ellis obviously as a medical officer. And the big one with the staffing plan, and this relates back to age, it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you have younger age kids, you're going to need more staff to manage and to maintain the social distancing, the other guidelines that are out there. And so your staffing plan is very, very important. And what are the layers of the staffing plan? And how do you have, what is the communication strategy between the staff during camp? And you really need to think long and hard about that. Ellis, anything to add to like how you would staff?
Yep, I think a big thing too within this pre-camp planning phase is bringing in the staff ahead of time to talk about what their concerns are, what their ideas are. A lot of times coaches are also teachers. So these are situations of adapting things to help people learn in the classroom. This is very similar. We're going to adapt to this special environment that we have to create now and getting feedback from the coaches. This is our plan. Poke holes. Same thing with the athletic trainers. You want to bring them in the pre-camp planning. Have those conversations. Maybe you have a favorite parent or two that you know you can trust and really like their feedback, and they're always challenging you in a good way. So really creating this pre-camp plan and running it by all the stakeholders and say, this is what I'm thinking. You know, where else can we improve? How else can we get involved here?
Yes, and the big one there, and Ellis is talking about bringing the staff in ahead of time, educating your staff. I mean, I can't believe that unless you've been under a rock for the last 2 months, that everyone doesn't know what's going on with COVID-19. But you, as a camp organizer, need to educate your staff on what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And more importantly, they need to help implement whatever your plan is going to be. You know, and specifically, I would suggest having a medical professional doing that education. And as we'll talk more about later in the webinar, we feel very strongly that there needs to be somebody coordinating your response to COVID-19 as a camp director and a camp organization. So staff education is super important and will facilitate a much more efficient and safe camp than without it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Staff education is a huge piece of this. Again, this is where you should be spending. If you're doing a week of camp, you should be doing 3 weeks of planning ahead of time at least. You need to have a lot of planning going into this, and education of your counselors is going to be huge. So, are they required to wear masks? What does that mean? How do they communicate with the mask? How do they communicate with kids? A lot of times, if you're demonstrating a drill, you just grab somebody's stick. So I have staff equipment on here. You grab a kid's stick and you're like, this is how we do this drill. Remember, that's not something we really want to do. So they should be bringing their own equipment. If that's how they tend to coach a lot, is with their own stick as opposed to with their hands if they're coaching lacrosse or baseball or whatnot. You need to make sure they bring their own stuff and really think about their own coaching style. Your younger coaches might need a little bit of help here. Visual cueing and verbal cueing is really, really hard to do. It's very hard to communicate, to teach somebody verbally how to move and how to move appropriately. So this is something that you might want to help almost do like a professional development with your coaches of here's the drills we're going to run. This is the cueing that goes along with the drills. You can do this visually, do this verbally. We're going to use these color cones. So really educating your staff on the full game plan of what camp is going to look like is a really good idea.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the next two on here are probably why you need to start thinking about camp 3 weeks in advance. The first one is your state and local requirements. You know, I know a lot of different states are in different color phases and things like that. And you need to be aware of what the guidelines are at the state and local level. And on top of that, your venue requirements. You know, if you have camp typically at a school or a public park, all of these venues could have different requirements as it relates and different guidelines as it relates to hosting camp on their grounds. And it's imperative that camp organizations know what those are ahead of time. And the primary reason for that is if you attended our webinar last week with John Sadler, who runs Sadler Sports and Recreation, which is one of the largest insurance agency broker for youth sports organizations, it's really, really important that you're following these guidelines from your state and local officials and health departments, because it's going to help you if there's an incident with liability and insurance. So super important. I cannot stress this enough. Someone at the camp needs to understand what the state and local guidelines are. Ellis, anything to add to that?
Yeah, thinking about venue requirements is if you're running ice hockey, you're obviously inside in a confined rink. So thinking about what your sports specifics are and how can you maintain that social distancing. Does that mean you should pack 50 kids into one ice rink? Probably not. If you don't think that you can maintain social distancing with that many kids on the ice, you really need to think about making a responsible decision here and really being able to, what is the venue, what is the state and the local saying. It changes county by county. I know one of our colleagues is down in Maryland, and Anne Arundel County has its own set of requirements, and I think he said it was 10 total people for a 50-yard field. So that includes your coaches. So just because they say 10 people, don't think that it's 10 campers. That includes all of the coaches standing within a 50-yard box. So really thinking about what your state and local requirements are, and really making responsible decisions to really try and keep everybody as safe as possible.
Yeah, and then we'll kind of go through these next two pretty quickly, and then I'll let Ellis talk about how important a contact audit is. But player and camp logistics, again, this is not rocket science. This is understanding the flow of your camp. How is check-in and car line and end of the day and lunch and all these different things. On a whole nother level, if you're running an overnight camp, which I think is going to be super challenging in the sort of the environment we're in, because you can't put two kids in a room probably, okay? And you need to think about, not just during the day, but the hangout times at night, what is going on there. So I think overnight camps could be a little bit more, would be a lot more work, and it's going to take a lot more planning. But in terms of camp and player logistics, you really need to sit down and think about how you're going to best and most efficiently and safely shepherd your players and your staff through this week of camp. And I think part of Ellis's 3 weeks of planning, part of that has to be a contact audit. And so, Ellis, can you talk to everybody about what a contact audit is and why it is so important?
Yep, so this is a way of just thinking about from the time your camper gets in the car with their parent to the time they get dropped off to the time they leave you that day. Think about all the different things that the campers will be touching. So whether it is their own stick or their own cone, or if it's a sport where you're passing a ball back and forth. So thinking about bathrooms and doors and where is there a lunchroom, which we'll get into that kind of thing. So monitoring where these high contact spaces are. And then if you are going to choose to disinfect them, making sure you're using one of the approved CDC disinfectants. So you are using a proper disinfectant that has been approved by the CDC. So really thinking about all the different things that people touch, how can you limit those contacts, and then how can you clean them if you can't limit the contact?
Yep, great. So we're going to kind of dive in here on the different aspects of camp. The first one is registration. I mean, it's 2020. I would think that most, if not everyone, is now using paperless registration and waivers. If you're not, I strongly suggest that that's the way you go. You obviously don't want papers being transferred between people. Again, if you were on our webinar last week with John Sadler, he stressed a COVID-19 waiver for staff and participants. One of the big things that John talked about was this assumption of risk, the fact that everybody knows that COVID-19 is out there, and by participating, they are assuming that risk. And he talks a lot about that specifically, so I encourage you to check out that first webinar we did last week. But you really need to have COVID-19 waivers for staff and participants. And along with that, this is something that we came up with, is that there's got to be an agreement and an acknowledgement of what the camp rules are. Obviously, camp is, the beauty of camp is that there's not always a ton of rules that allows kids to enjoy themselves, be with their friends, all of those types of things. There has to be an agreement and an acknowledgement of camp rules. And frankly, those should be sent out ahead in pre-event communications, which we'll get to in a second. And then the last one is you have to actively engage campers, parents, staff, that if the rules aren't followed, there's going to be repercussions. And why this is so important to follow this. Me personally, I know we have up here walk-up registration. I probably wouldn't allow for walk-up registration if I was running camp. I don't know how Ellis feels about that, but if I was running camp, I would say that there would be no walk-up registration, because that is adding to the number of people showing up on the first day. And more importantly, you now have person-to-person contact, at a table, things like that. And you have to start getting into, is there a shield and stuff like that. So me personally, I would not allow for walk-up registration. Obviously Venmo, PayPal, those types of solutions, you could absolutely have that happen. I would recommend against it. Ellis, anything to add to this?
No, I agree with you. Again, it's just eliminating that walk-up registration is eliminating another point of contact. So it's another conversation. I agree with you that I think if you could eliminate that, that's probably a good thing in the long run.
Yeah, and so one point of clarification on the COVID-19 waivers for staff and participants. They probably, I'm not a lawyer, Ellis is not a lawyer, so I strongly suggest that you talk to local legal counsel for those. I would think they would be primarily, they would be similar in a lot of ways. However, I think the staff and participants would be signing two different waivers. That was a question that just came in along the way. I want to touch on that right now. All right. Again, if you haven't figured it out, Ellis and I are huge on communication and pre-event communication. And the biggest thing is you need to tell your parents and campers that what is our mitigation protocols? What are we doing as a camp, as an organization, to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 at our camp? And some of the things that go into that are what we're talking about, but pick up and drop off instructions. Everyone loves when they show up to camp and everyone's there mulling around at the beginning. Like, that can't happen this summer. You need to have specific pick up and drop off instructions. Camp structure and rules. Again, the days of showing up to camp and going over these things in the morning in big groups, like, that's over. I personally would have the camp plan emailed out to parents and kids the night before so they know what's coming the next day. List of what to bring. This is huge. So everybody knows they have that one camper that forgets everything. Stick, a ball, whatever it may be. Well, we can't really be sharing those types of things anymore. So it's really important to bring not only what you need for camp as a participant, but also instructing the parents, like, hey, if you need to bring extra socks and extra shorts and extra t-shirts, then you need to do that in their own bag, because you can't be sharing those types of stuff. On-site medical staff, like, this would be priority number one for me. Hey, if you come to my camp, you need to know that we have a medical professional on site who's helping us. We have started to see these COVID coordinators from our clients and customers at Go for Ellis. And it adds a level of, not only customer service, but also they're medical professionals. They know how to handle these types of things. Water, hydration, like, what are the rules? Like, you can't have like a jug of water and sharing water bottles and cups and things like that anymore. Everyone needs to bring their own water. And then the big one, and I don't have any like hard and fast rules on lunch, because every venue and every camp is going to present a different set of issues. But lunch rules need to be properly spelled out. And this all needs to happen in the pre-event communication, which means you have to have taken the time to think through every day at camp. I'll give you another one that's not on here that what happens if it rains and there's a thunderstorm? And the original plan was we're going to all go in the dugout, or we're all going to go into the gym. Those might not be the right answers anymore. So you need to think about that. Ellis, do you want to add anything to any of these?
Yeah, just two things on the COVID-19 transmission mitigation protocol. So talking to the parents about, if you're feeling sick or if your child is feeling sick, please don't come to camp. If they've been around somebody recently that was diagnosed with COVID, please don't come to camp. So really making the parents self-screen their kids before they even get to camp. And so they're not sending their sick child to camp. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. The other thing is to make sure that they understand what the process is going to be if there is a COVID positive case, and what that you might, as an event operator, feel obligated. Hey, we did have a positive case. It's going to be communicated in a very professional way. But going into the camp, they know if there is a positive case, if your child has a positive case, we're going to communicate it to the rest of the camp that there was a positive case at this camp. You may have been exposed. Please follow up with your physician. We're going to get more into that later, but that's something that should be communicated up front, that we're going to be abiding by all HIPAA rules. We're not going to say, hey, Andy had COVID and Andy was partners with Chris and Brian on the field. So Chris and Brian, just so you know, your friend Andy got sick. Remember, that's a total HIPAA violation. So you need to be very careful with how you are communicating these things back. And again, make sure that parents know going into it that this is our mitigation plan, and this is how we're going to try and communicate this to people going forward.
No, that's a great point. So let's focus on one part here. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, and they're very venue specific. But, drop off and pick up are obviously the parts where are the time when you have the most people coming and going, and everyone's been a car line in the morning, in the afternoon, and generally it's controlled chaos. Again, this needs to be communicated to parents and campers ahead of time. The car line, the parents should stay in the car unless there's an emergency. It's really that simple. The goal here is the primary mitigation rule here is if you don't have as many people in one area, that's going to be a good thing. Staggered drop-off or drop-off by pre-designated by group. This is, again, where you're planning with your staff. So, for example, if I have younger age kids and I have 2 staff members, maybe they're being dropped off at a different part of the parking lot to them every morning. Those types of things you need to think about. The other one is, you really shouldn't be crossing any roads if at all possible. And the idea there is that you're holding campers' hands, especially younger ones, to walk them to their car. Ellis, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I have a little bit to add. So just thinking about as we move out of our stay-at-home orders and things like that, the next step is cohorting and these natural cohorts that are going to happen. And so creating these smaller cohorts and staying within those cohorts or pods for the entire week. So maybe in your pre-event communication, it's, hey, your daughter is on team red. So when you come up, can you have a red something in the window? We will direct you to the red car drop-off line. All those coaches all week will be wearing red t-shirts. If your kids have a red t-shirt, that's awesome. They're going to eat lunch with the red kids. They're going to do drills with the red kids. And then all of the red kids go back to the red car line, and it's maybe a different car line. So we don't have 150 campers all sitting on the same hill. So thinking about creative ways, again, with our verbal and visual cueing to help organize car line and make it so it's a more efficient process for everybody involved.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, first day camp rules. So everyone knows we come to camp and then everyone gets together in a big group and we go over the camp rules. That's not a good idea. Again, these things need to be communicated ahead of time. And I think you need to ask your parents to help explain some of these things to their kids, and the primary one is you got to mitigate unnecessary contact. And this is not what camp's about. We all get it, but you can't have hugging. You can't have high-fiving and fist bumps, no huddles, no sharing water, no sharing sunscreen, maintaining social distance between drills. And I would take it we think you take it to another level, and you need to post these rules in a highly visible locations because, in the heat of battle, camp, whatever, kids are going to want to celebrate. They've been inside for 2 months. So you've got to keep reminding them, and your staff needs to understand why these things are very important, that we can't, in the mitigation of the spread of the virus. Ellis, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, normally camp's kind of relaxed and fun. It's got to be a lot more organized. And you're going to remember that these are kids, like they may have not seen their classmates since March. So they might be really excited and want to run up and hug their friends, and they want to be close to what they want to do. But you just need to remember that we have to constantly be, the coaches and everybody needs to be constantly reminded of like, hey, 6 feet apart, make sure you're having all those social distancing guidelines really posted and enforced constantly.
So drills, this is just, again, there's a lot of coaches and camp directors that have been doing camp, and I am by no means the expert, but you have to step back and think about your normal camp day, and there's going to have to be a major curriculum and drill adjustment. You know, primarily when players are not participating in a drill, like where are they standing? You know, myself as a longtime camp director, you know, these camps are going to be focused on individual skill development. You're going to have to get creative. You know, conditioning instead of competition, small groups, limit contact, no sharing equipment. As a former lacrosse coach, you're going to have to think about how you're going to hold camp where players, the focus of the camp is not necessarily competition, but it's, you got to work on, we're going to get better, and here's how we're going to get better. So it's really important, and I would say that in the red box on there is most important for the young campers, because they're going to struggle to stay sort of regimented, which is why, as I suggested earlier, you're going to have a couple more staff members depending on your numbers for those younger age groups. Alice, anything to add?
Yeah, a couple things. So think about your regular camp agenda and your regular camp curriculum. A lot of that's just out the window, unfortunately, this summer. So I think all of us probably played or coached World Cup, right? So you do drills in the morning, you eat lunch, and then you come back and we're going to have competition, and I'm on Team Italy and you're on Team Brazil, and we get to play World Cup against each other. Like, that's a game, but that's a competition that's not going to happen this summer. And so you got to get a little bit creative with how are you going to introduce forms of competition that aren't head-to-head competition. So maybe it's conditioning where it's sprints or like fun runs or things like that, where you can try and add in a layer of conditioning with some skills, or like an obstacle course or things like that. You can get creative and keep them interested within the vein of competition, but it's not true, we're playing 5v5. Another big thing, think about with players when they're not participating in the drill, naturally structure your drills so there's more people involved than there are actually standing. I think about one of my favorite coaches, Coach Kuprion. He does this naturally as a coach. If you watch his drills, he's got more kids in the drill working and only 2 kids out of the drill standing at any time. So he's working conditioning into the drill constantly because he has smaller groups, and he thinks about the amount of players ahead of time that can be involved. So really kind of rethinking about how you avoid long lines anywhere, because kids are going to kind of naturally want to stand next to each other in these lines. Maybe you even put cones in lines. So it's, all right, you go to that cone, then you move up to the next, then you go to that cone, and you move up to the next. So really rethinking your drills, and that might take longer than 3 weeks. You might have to really spend some time and do a lot of research on some non-contact drills that are more skill development, not so much contact oriented.
No, that's a great point. Hey, Alice, quick question. Would you have campers wearing masks? You know, we have a couple questions on that. Like where obviously staff, yes, but campers, like what is your opinion on that, or what are the guidelines regarding masks?
The CDC does not recommend anybody under 2 years of old wear a mask. I would, again, go to the CDC guidelines and read all the guidelines about masks. If they can comfortably wear a mask and play, then that's great. I mean, if you think about it, it's just like kind of putting on a seatbelt. It's just we are decreasing the potentially the spread, the droplet transmission of COVID. So obviously if you can wear a mask comfortably and play, that's awesome. Sometimes there might be certain things with the child, maybe they're a little claustrophobic, that they don't really like wearing the mask. So that's something that you need to kind of take into consideration. That's going to be a case-by-case scenario. But the CDC does have some guidelines about that as far as like age appropriateness does go. One thing I do want to say, CDC, nobody should ever wear a mask in a pool. It is very hard to breathe with a wet mask on your face. I just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. That was something that the CDC has been very clear about. Do not swim with a mask.
And Alice, what about staff? Staff should be in masks, correct?
I believe so. If I was running a camp and I was hiring and paying the coaches, I would say you need to wear a mask. Absolutely.
Great. Awesome. All right, so breaks and lunch. I mean, this is going to be the most challenging part of camp, I think. You need to, again, when you're planning ahead of time, designating where breaks will be held, designating a home cone for each player where they can keep their stuff. Lunch, all players should bring their own food and water, figuring out how to socially distance in a lunchroom or an area outside. These are all things that, again, aren't overly complicated, but when you have 60 kids at 11:37 a.m. and they're starving after the morning session, like, this could get out of control really quickly. And so this is where you need to have a plan. You need to have your staff well organized and well trained on this is how we're going to do lunch. Ellis, anything there?
I mean, personally, lunch is always a chaotic experience from any camp. I think I saw more injuries from knockout basketball at lunch than I did from actual playing in the camp. So think about what activities, like, did they typically play basketball at lunch in the gym? Did they swim? Was that something that was built into the lunch? So think really reimagining lunch and lunchtime activities is definitely a very good thing to do.
Great. So now we're going to kind of shift. We've kind of given you some things that you need to consider as a camp operator and a camp organizer, and we're going to kind of talk specifically on how athletic trainers can help execute these mitigation strategies for camps. And the biggest one from my previous experience is a COVID coordinator. And essentially, in my capacity as a camp director for a long time, having an athletic trainer serve as your COVID-19 coordinators is going to help you organize, plan, execute, and document these preventative transmission actions. And if you don't know, athletic trainers are trained and do this every day, not necessarily COVID-19, but they do all these other things that would be necessary to be a COVID-19 coordinator. They come up with emergency action plans. They are very much into preventative. Everyone thinks that an athletic trainer is, only the person that's going to run on the field and when something bad happens. And I'll let Ellis kind of dive in on this, but I just want to say, as a camp director of 20 years, we always had an athletic trainer serve as our medical officer at camp, and it makes everything else that we've been talking about today a lot easier.
Yeah, one of the number one goal for athletic trainers always is prevention. We are, a lot of us think it's more the musculoskeletal injuries and preventing injuries from happening, but a huge part of our background and what we're trained in is also illness. So we take care of injuries and illness. So we can really help go through and with you and look at your plan. So this is something where you would want to involve that athletic trainer very early on in these conversations. So involve all your stakeholders, the AT being one. So come up with your plan, have a conversation with the athletic trainer and say, hey, this is all the stuff that I'm thinking about doing. Do you have any suggestions for improvement? Or have you heard anything different from the CDC or any other local guidelines? This is the research that I've found. So it's really nice for you to get a final rough draft together, have those conversations with the athletic trainers. Emergency planning and pre-event planning is what we do best. We write emergency action plans for our high schools, our colleges. We're in charge of making sure there's an AED on site. We're in charge of assessing environmental health factors, so risk factors. So this is just another kind of thing that we're able to do is we have this background in looking at an event holistically and seeing where the weak points are and being able to really kind of pick it out and have a conversation with you about what is the best way to kind of mitigate this risk as a whole.
I mean, we can, Ellis, I'll let you chime in on this real quickly. I think we've covered
pre-event communication. I think we kind of covered the whole time. So it's, again, write that draft email and then send it to your athletic trainer and say, this is all the stuff, like, what did I miss? And you should be like, oh, well, campers should pack their own sunscreen. They should pack their own hand sanitizer. They should bring this kind of extra stuff. Parents should have masks on when they're doing drop-offs. So maybe they're going to think of a couple things that maybe you didn't quite think about before. So again, pre-event, this is 3 weeks and even before that, your camp plan, like get an athletic trainer involved and have them review and kind of go through the plan with you.
Alice, can you take like 30 seconds and talk about PPE and how athletic trainers can help camp organizers ensure that it's being used properly?
Yeah, even from a friend of mine who's actually running some stuff right now, it's coaches are required to wear masks, but they don't always wear them properly because it's hot or because they wanted to do something. So it's that constant kind of reminder, like, hey, just make sure your mask is up and covering your nose and your chin, and making sure that they're wearing their own PPE appropriately too. So it's not just the coaches that are going to have to be doing all the verbal cueing and reminders of social distancing. The athletic trainers can kind of help with the coaches being like, hey, do you mind just like pull your mask up a little bit? So just really trying to create and make sure everyone's really enforcing and also following the rules and the procedure that you guys have put together.
So what's up with temperature screening? I know you have a lot to say on this, but like, what can we tell camp operators and organizers around temperature screening?
So temperature screening is something that we're seeing a lot of people kind of move away from a little bit. Thermometer availability is becoming challenging for sure. There's also, depending upon the thermometer, it may not be the most accurate assessment of core body temperature. There's a lot of research out there that you can read about what's the most accurate way to assess temperature. Some of the thermometers that they're using aren't necessarily assessing the core body temperature. They're looking at your skin temperature. So if you are doing a temp screening and it's July and it's outside, your skin temperature could easily be over 100, be like 110 or so. If you ever put your head on the top, or your hand on the top of your head in the middle of the summer, your head is on fire. Thinking about how if you are going to do temperature screening, remember you're going to have to develop a policy for that, and you have to follow it. So even if it's your favorite kid or that came to camp that day, or maybe even it's your own kid and they fail the temperature screening, you have to stick to your policy because it's written. So you need to make sure that if you are doing temperature screening, you have the policy written, it's been communicated to parents. So when somebody drops off, you do the temperature screening, they fail, they have to get back in the car with their parent and they need to leave because that's your camp policy. So making sure that if you are doing temperature screening, you are writing those types of policies, that you have to follow them to a T, because that really opens you up to some liability.
So how does an athletic trainer help a camp director or a camp organization during the actual camp, Alice?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit about this already. So monitoring your own staff, making sure that they are wearing their masks, making sure that the staff themselves are following social distancing, trying to limit, hey, maybe don't share your stick or don't do that. Maybe even looking at the drills and thinking at the end of the day, hey, this drill is actually a little bit closer than we thought it was going to be. We should maybe reconfigure it. So really kind of monitoring and being an observer of how this plan is being executed and unfolding it, and constantly thinking, how can we improve it? How can we make this safer? This is something that athletic trainers do every time. We are the ones that stand on the sideline and watch these things happen, and we watch how you coach, and we see that like you tend to be very close, or you're just, you like the physical cueing, and it's like, when you go over and try and teach something, instead of grabbing their hands to redirect them, make sure you stand 6 feet away and then kind of show it. So it's a way to kind of monitor the whole camp to make sure everybody's really following the social distancing and all the pre protocols and guidelines and rules that were laid out ahead of time. It's really kind of helping to enforce those things that you agreed upon at the beginning of camp.
And this next one, Alice, is your favorite one. So how do athletic trainers help camp operators comply and document all of the state and local issues that we need to know about?
This is an open conversation that changes every minute. I think at some point today, Pennsylvania is supposed to be releasing some more information about sports and as it relates to COVID. PIAA, I believe, was supposed to release something today too. So this is up to the minute. Things change. It could change midweek for your camp as well. So trying to keep in contact and sending people like, hey, this is the latest thing I got from the state. This is the latest thing I got from the county. Is this what you're seeing as well? So really making sure that you are shooting those things back and forth with the athletic trainer. They can try and help you kind of go through that and look at them and go, all right, yep, that's kind of what I've been seeing too. So really having those conversations of like, is this the most up-to-date information that you know about too? Athletic trainers, preseason's coming. We're all kind of everyone's talking about how are we going to return to sport, how some colleges are doing it right now. So this is something that's a hot conversation within our profession that we need to figure out how we are going to return to sports safely. So this is something that a lot of athletic trainers are following very closely.
Great. And so this is, I think, the one that everybody wants to know. So how, as a camp organizer and a camp director, do we deal with, and this is where I think having an athletic trainer at camp or a medical professional at camp is so important. But what happens if people aren't feeling well? And how do we handle that, or how should we handle that as camp organizers and directors?
I think that's something you need to really lay out in the beginning in the camp rules too. Like, hey, this is Ian. He is the athletic trainer for the camp. If you're not feeling well, if you have any of these symptoms like fever or a cough or a sore throat, make sure you go talk to Ian. Making sure that they know who to go if they don't feel well themselves. And then the athletic trainer will go in and they'll do the evaluation that they've been trained to do. This is something that, like I said earlier, yes, we take care of a lot of injuries, but illness is a huge pillar within our clinical practice. So they'll do the evaluation and then figure out what we have to do from there. It's no different than looking at any sort of musculoskeletal injury, or if you suspect maybe strep throat or the flu, calling the parent and saying, hey, I think your child is potentially exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms. It could also just be the flu, or it could be any other thing, but I think you should come pick them up and call your family physician. So that is something that the athletic trainer can absolutely handle, is helping run through an evaluation just like it's any other evaluation, and make sure that they can communicate to the parent that they think that this is the next step for that for the child, and then following up with the parent and saying, hey, how did it go? Remember, HIPAA is going to be a huge thing with COVID-19. So making sure that if they are exhibiting symptoms, that you have a place to isolate the camper. Does it mean go into the dugout? Probably not. The dugout has 3 walls, so you're essentially putting somebody with symptoms in a confined space with the athletic trainer. So I would also probably make sure it doesn't say like COVID tent over here, because that's, again, a HIPAA violation. You're throwing somebody underneath their diagnosis. So making sure that it's private, held very responsibly. They are distanced from the campers, and that it's handled appropriately. Again, if the parent then reaches back out and says, it came back positive or it's negative, we're totally fine. Having those conversations, it's going to be a big thing for having and a reason to have an athletic trainer. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, listen, thank you for that. And there's a couple questions we have that I want to sort of bring up to the group and try to answer them. And if you have other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us and contact us at goforellis.com, and we will be happy to do our best to answer them. So the first one is, Ellis, as a camp organizer, should I be providing hand sanitizer?
I would say as a camp organizer, you should be educating and enforcing proper hygiene as much as possible. So if there are sinks available or portable sinks or hand sanitizer available, that's going to be a good thing for you. I think it's also probably a good thing to put in the packing list for the parents is have your kids pack their own hand sanitizer too. Hand sanitizer, you can never have enough hand sanitizer. So I think if you're able to provide it, I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, great. So we have a couple questions about the COVID waiver language as it relates to participant and staff. And I just want to reiterate what I maybe wasn't clear about earlier. We strongly suggest that you talk to your local counsel on that, neither LSI or lawyers. And more importantly, a participant and a staff waiver could look different. So we strongly suggest that you talk to your local counsel on that. However, there are, in our first webinar, we do have some language that it came from John Sadler at Sadler Sports around the COVID waiver. And also in that first webinar, if you check out his blog, his resource center is by far the most exhaustive that we've seen. So a couple people asked about the COVID-19 waiver. That's sort of how we would handle it. The other big question, I'm trying to see, sorry, I'm just trying to go through everybody's stuff here, is Actually, you know what? We've answered everything else. So I think we must have done a pretty good job. Anybody who has other questions, concerns, issues, please reach out to us. Ellis is our Chief Medical Officer at Go for Ellis. She will be very happy to do her best to help. Um, and thank you. We hope that everybody has a safe camp. And please do not hesitate to reach out to us with questions. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.